The fluorescent lights of the St. Albans Veterans Affairs Psychiatric Facility, Long Island, hummed with a weary, incessant drone, casting harsh, unflattering shadows that seemed to pool in the corners of the day room and stretch like grasping specters down the long, sterile corridors. Sergeant Thomas Grady, or the man they called Sergeant Grady, stared with a vacant intensity out of the reinforced window, his reflection a ghostly superimposition upon the drab, manicured lawn beyond. The window pane cool against his forehead was his primary companion. 6 months had bled into one another since his medically induced transfer from the acute trauma unit at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. But time in its conventional, relentless march held little meaning, little purchase in the dense, clinging fog that perpetually consumed his mind. It was a landscape of shifting grays, of half-formed thoughts and phantom sensations. The rain of persistent, melancholic tapping against the thick glass mirrored the disconnected shrapnel-like fragments of memory that would occasionally violently surface. Images of blinding sun, the percussive roar of explosions, the acrid taste of dust and fear, only to shatter and slip away before his conscious mind could grasp their significance, leaving behind only a residue of raw, unexplained emotion. He existed in a perpetual state of nearly just out of reach. "Sonun." "Good morning, Sergeant Grady," a calm, measured voice announced from the doorway. Dr. Elaine Monroe, chief resident psychiatrist, stood with his medical chart clutched in one hand, a reusable coffee mug in the other. Her expression, as always, was one of carefully cultivated professional compassion, a mask that Alistair often wondered if she ever removed. "How are we feeling this morning?" Thomas didn't acknowledge her presence beyond a slight, almost imperceptible tensing of his broad shoulders. "Same as yesterday, Doc. Same as always." He paused, searching for a word that could encapsulate the chasm within. "Empty. Just empty." His voice, when he chose to use it, was a low, gravelly rasp, the rough, abraded edge of a man who not so very long ago had been accustomed to shouting complex orders over the deafening cacophony of sustained machine gun fire and the visceral crump of mortar impacts. The scar, a livid, puckered welt that snaked along his left jawline from ear to chin, was merely the most visible external evidence of what the improvised explosive device had wrought. The true and devastating damage, Dr. Monroe knew, lay far deeper beneath the recently healed bone of his skull, where memory's identity and a lifetime of experience had been violently, irrevocably shattered like a precious glass figurine dropped onto concrete. "Your latest cognitive scans and neurological assessments show continued physical healing." Dr. Monroe began, her voice gentle but firm, as she took her customary seat in the worn armchair opposite his usual perch by the window. "The inflammation is significantly reduced in synaptic activity in the prefrontal cortex is showing marginal improvement." "Spare me the medical mumbo-jumbo, Doc." Thomas cut in, his voice suddenly sharp, laced with a bitter, weary cynicism. 6 months of your tests, your scans, your endless bloody questions, and all you people can definitively tell me is that I should remember who I am, but I bloody well don't. These abrupt, unpredictable transitions from a state of relative, albeit detached lucidity to one of confused, aggressive agitation had become a disturbing, defining hallmark of his complex condition. One moment he might speak with the quiet, ingrained authority of a seasoned, non-commissioned officer. The next he would become explosively hostile, lost in the terrifying, disorienting grip of partial flashbacks that lacked any discernible context or narrative cohesion, lashing out at an unseen, unheard enemy. "You were Sergeant Thomas Michael Grady, United States Army, 5th Special Forces Group, Operational Detachment Alpha." She reminded him patiently, her voice a steady anchor in his swirling sea of confusion. It was a ritual they performed daily, a laying of foundational stones in the shifting sands of his amnesia. "You completed 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. You were decorated for valor. You were severely injured 6 months ago during a kinetic engagement in the Kandahar province. So you keep telling me Thomas muttered, his gaze returning to the rain-slicked window, dismissing her words as if they were a meaningless litany. "But they're just words, Doc. Facts on a page. I don't feel it. I don't feel anything." He pressed his forehead harder against the cool glass, as if trying to force some sensation, some connection through the unyielding barrier of his own skull. The medical and ancillary staff at St. Albans approached Thomas with an understandable, deeply ingrained caution. He was a paradox, a man physically formidable, yet mentally fractured. 3 orderlies, young men themselves, had been significantly injured, one requiring surgery for a dislocated shoulder during his unpredictable, violent episodes. His formidable physical strength, honed by years of rigorous special forces training, had returned with alarming rapidity, far outpacing any discernible mental or emotional stability. This made him exceptionally dangerous when a stray sound, a particular smell, or a misunderstood word could trigger a full-blown combat memory, his highly trained body responding with lethal efficiency to perceived threats that existed only in the shattered landscape of his mind. Dr. Monroe had volunteered to take on his exceptionally challenging case when 2 previous, highly experienced psychiatrists had formally requested reassignment, citing safety concerns and a profound lack of therapeutic progress. Where others saw an unacceptable risk, a lost cause, she recognized a profoundly wounded warrior, a man trapped in a terrifying, isolating purgatory between a past he could not recall and a future he could not envision. She had a younger brother serving with the Marines in Helmand, a fact that perhaps fueled her unwavering, almost stubborn dedication to Thomas's case. "Today, Thomas, we're going to try something a little different," she said, her tone carefully neutral, betraying none of the apprehension or hope that churned beneath her professional calm. "A slight deviation from our established routine." Thomas emitted a short, harsh, bitter laugh, devoid of any genuine amusement. "Another miracle cure, Doc. Another experimental drug. Perhaps some more electroshock to jolt the old gray matter back online." "None of the above, I assure you," Dr. Monroe replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Something, or rather, someone, quite unexpected has arrived for you this morning. Something or someone from before, from the life you don't remember." Choridi, the sudden, uncharacteristic commotion in the East Corridor, normally a haven of hushed institutional quiet, drew the immediate attention of patients and staff alike. Heads turned, conversations faltered. A uniformed army officer, a captain by his rank insignia, was leading a magnificent, powerfully built Belgian Malinois through the main security checkpoint. The dog, its coat, the color of dark honey and burnt sugar, moved with a fluid, controlled grace, its intelligent amber eyes constantly scanning its surroundings, alert to every nuance, every subtle shift in the environment. Its ears, large and expressive, swiveled like radar dishes processing a symphony of sounds inaudible to human perception. Suddenly, those ears perked sharply forward, its entire body tensing, its intense, unwavering gaze locking onto Thomas, who stood oblivious, some 30 yards down the corridor, staring out of another window. Before the startled army handler could react, before he could even tighten his grip on the leash, the Malinois lunged forward with explosive, unexpected power, dragging the surprised officer several involuntary steps, its paws scrabbling for purchase on the polished linoleum floor. "Weferiu, valor, heel, damn it. Heel!" The handler commanded sharply, his voice laced with surprise and embarrassment. The dog, after a moment of intense internal conflict, reluctantly slowly obeyed, sinking back onto its haunches, but its gaze, fiery and intense, never once left Thomas. Something about the name Valor sent a strange, inexplicable shiver, a cold electric current through Thomas's clouded consciousness, though he couldn't fathom why. It was like a word heard in a dream, familiar yet utterly alien. He felt a sudden irrational surge of anxiety, a primal need to retreat. He turned abruptly and disappeared back into the relative sanctuary of his sparsely furnished room as several members of the facility staff, alerted by the commotion, converged around the unexpected visitors. Within the hour, Dr. Monroe appeared at his open doorway, a thick, official-looking manila folder held carefully in her hands. "Sergeant Grady Thomas," she began, her voice softer now, more tentative. "There's someone here who we believe may know you, or rather, knew you. A military working dog, a Belgian Malinois named Valor. According to these official military transfer papers and service records," she tapped the folder, "he was your assigned canine partner for approximately 14 months in Afghanistan during your final deployment." Thomas stared at her blankly, his expression unreadable, the words seemingly failing to penetrate the dense fog of his amnesia. "A dog? I don't remember any dog. I'm not a dog person." "That's not entirely surprising, Thomas, given your current condition," Dr. Monroe said gently, her gaze steady, compassionate. "But his handler, Captain Davies from the Army's MWD program at Fort Bragg, has provided extensive corroborated documentation. These records clearly show that MWD Valor Service Number K9377 was indeed your officially assigned operational partner during your entire last deployment to Afghanistan." "My partner," Thomas repeated the word slowly, his brow furrowing in confusion, the concept feeling utterly foreign, absurd. That's impossible. I would remember something like that. A dog, for God's sake." "Would you, Thomas?" Dr. Monroe asked softly, her question probing, challenging his certainty. "You currently don't remember the names or faces of your squad mates, your commanding officer, or even your own family with any consistent clarity. Why would a dog be any different?" Before Thomas could formulate a response, before he could articulate the rising tide of irritation and disbelief, a fresh commotion erupted in the hallway outside his room. The Malinois Valor had somehow inexplicably broken free from his handler again. He bolted down the corridor with astonishing speed and agility, a tawny streak of focused canine determination, arriving at Thomas's open doorway in seconds. His ears were locked forward, his powerful body vibrating with an almost palpable, contained energy, his tail held low and stiff. "Get that thing out of here now!" Thomas shouted, his voice raw with sudden, inexplicable fear, as he instinctively backed away deeper into the Spartan confines of his room. Something about the dog's intense, unwavering, almost accusatory focus unnerved him profoundly, touching a raw, unidentifiable nerve deep within his fractured psyche. Captain Davies, the dog's handler, arrived moments later, breathless and profusely apologetic, as he quickly, expertly clipped the heavy-duty leash back onto Valor's tactical collar. "I am so incredibly sorry, Sergeant Grady Dr. Monroe." He stammered, his face flushed with embarrassment. He's never ever done anything like this before. Valor is usually disciplined to an absolute fault. He's a model MWD. "I don't know this animal." Thomas snapped, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and a deeper, unacknowledged trepidation. "I don't want it anywhere near me. Take it away." The dog Valor whined softly, then a low, mournful, almost heartbroken sound that was somehow far more distressing to Thomas than its previous determined, almost aggressive approach. Its intelligent amber eyes filled with an expression Thomas couldn't decipher, but which felt disturbingly familiar, never once left his face. This impromptu visit, I must confess, wasn't entirely my arrangement. "Thomas," Dr. Monroe explained, her gaze shifting between the distressed veteran and the equally agitated dog. "Your former commanding officer, Colonel Armitage, personally arranged for Valor to be brought here. He strongly believed that seeing Valor interacting with him might somehow trigger your memory recovery, perhaps provide a crucial emotional link to your past." Thomas stared at the dog, at Valor, feeling only a confusing, unsettling mixture of irritation, fear, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of something else, something he couldn't name. "Well, it doesn't. It's not working. Take it away. I want it gone." God, as Captain Davies began to gently but firmly pull Valor back from the threshold of the room, the dog resisted with surprising strength, planting his powerful paws firmly on the polished floor, refusing to yield. The struggle wasn't overtly aggressive, not a display of dominance. but rather one of quiet, desperate, unshakable determination. It was as if the dog was pleading silently for something Thomas couldn't understand. "I will allow MWD Valor to remain here temporarily. Captain, Doctor," Munro decided after a moment of careful consideration, overriding Thomas's vehement objections. "Not in your room, Thomas, not yet, but perhaps in the common areas under Captain Davies's direct supervision. Let's just see what happens." An observation period. Thomas turned away dismissively, presenting his back to them, his shoulders rigid with resentment. "Do what you want, Doc. You always do anyway." As they finally managed to lead the reluctant Valor away down the corridor, the dog looked back over its shoulder one last time, its intelligent eyes fixed on Thomas, a soft, plaintive whine escaping its throat, a sound that seemed to contain equal heart-wrenching measures of profound recognition and unbearable, sorrowful pain. 3 days later, the clinical staff at St. Albans had begun to meticulously document Valor's consistently unusual, almost uncanny patterns of behavior. The highly trained Belgian Malinois, when not confined to a temporary kennel, in a quiet administrative office, positioned himself with almost strategic precision in locations where Thomas would inevitably encounter him throughout the course of his rigidly structured day. During Thomas's grueling twice-daily physical therapy sessions in the facility's well-equipped gymnasium, Valor would suddenly silently appear in the corridor, outside his noble head, visible through the reinforced glass panel of the door, watching Thomas's every painful movement with an unwavering, intense focus. When Thomas ate his solitary meals in the noisy, echoing common area, avoiding eye contact and interaction with the other patients, the dog would quietly, unobtrusively settle himself precisely 12 feet away, close enough, Alistair noted, to observe Thomas clearly, but just beyond the critical distance that seemed to trigger Thomas's overt agitation and anxiety. It's almost like he's running a covert surveillance operation, remarked Jim, a burly, kind-faced senior orderly, a man who had served 2 combat tours with the Marines in Iraq and possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of both soldiers and dogs. "That's not random positioning, that's tactical. He's observing, assessing, waiting. Emichum." On the 4th night, the facility's sophisticated network of motion-activated security cameras captured an even more extraordinary, almost unbelievable sequence of events. Valor, who was supposedly secured in the locked administration office, was recorded somehow manipulating the handle of his door, then padding silently like a ghost down the deserted, dimly lit corridors to the locked supply closet on Thomas's ward. This closet contained the few remaining personal effects that had been recovered from Afghanistan and shipped back with Thomas, items he had steadfastly refused to look at or acknowledge. The footage showed Valor with astonishing dexterity nudging open the closet door, which had been improperly latched by a tired night nurse. He then carefully, selectively extracted Thomas's battered sandcake combat boots from a sealed plastic bag. He carried them one by one with infinite, almost reverent care in his mouth back to Thomas's room, placing them precisely side by side at the threshold, their toes pointing inwards. Thomas discovered the boots the next morning. Instead of his usual explosive rage at such perceived intrusions, his typical violent rejection of any unsolicited contact with his past, he stood staring down at them for a full 5 minutes, his expression unreadable before slowly, almost reluctantly, picking them up and placing them carefully inside his own locker, rather than hurling them out into the corridor, as he had done with other similar items. The following night, Valor repeated his clandestine nocturnal mission. This time he retrieved a small tarnished metal object from the depths of the supply closet, a set of standard-issue military dog tags bearing Thomas's name, rank, service number, and blood type. These too were placed with the same deliberate, almost ceremonial care at Thomas's closed door. During Thomas's increasingly strained and unproductive individual therapy sessions with Dr. Munro, Valor, if allowed, would wait patiently, silently, just outside her office door, his breathing often audible to Thomas within. On particularly difficult, volatile days, When Thomas's simmering frustration and confusion escalated perilously towards the verge of physical violence, the dog would begin to scratch insistently, urgently at the office door, until someone, usually a concerned nurse, opened it. Valor would then enter the room not aggressively, but with a calm, quiet authority, and deliberately, pointedly position himself directly between Thomas and Dr. Monroe. Not as a threat, but it seemed to all observers as a protective, de-escalating presence. "He's not being threatening in those moments," Dr. Monroe noted thoughtfully in her clinical log after one such incident. "His posture is non-aggressive, submissive even. He appears to be intervening, actively attempting to calm Thomas, to ground him, to divert his escalating agitation." It's quite remarkable. Most revealing, perhaps, were the unguarded private moments captured by the ubiquitous, unblinking eyes of the facility's surveillance system. The cameras showed Thomas late at night, when he believed himself to be unobserved, watching Valor from the darkened window of his room as the dog lay patiently in the corridor. On several occasions, staff members making their routine nightly checks caught fleeting, furtive glimpses of Thomas holding the tarnished dog tags Valor had delivered, turning them over and over in his calloused fingers, a silent, secret, almost unwilling connection to a life he couldn't consciously recall, a life he wouldn't or couldn't publicly acknowledge. By the end of the second week, the delicate, unspoken, almost invisible balance between Thomas's stubborn, fearful resistance and Valor's unwavering, patient persistence had begun to visibly, irrevocably fracture. The inevitable breaking point, when it finally arrived, came with the unexpected, explosive force of a detonating landmine. It occurred during a voluntary group therapy session 1, which Thomas, after much cajoling from Dr. Monroe and the promise of extra commissary privileges, had reluctantly, resentfully agreed to attend. 5 other combat veterans, their faces etched with the invisible scars of their own unique wars, sat in a loose, uncomfortable circle, discussing the myriad complex challenges of their returns from distant, brutal battlefields. When another veteran, a stoic, gray-haired man who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, began to describe in a low, halting voice the agonizing experience of losing his best friend, his childhood buddy, in a bloody firefight in the Ia Drang Valley, something in the raw, visceral emotion of his words, something in the shared pain of that long-ago loss triggered a sudden, violent, and overwhelmingly vivid flashback in Thomas. "Get down, incoming sniper on the goddamn ridge!" Thomas screamed, his voice a raw, terrifying bellow of pure combat adrenaline, as he launched himself across the small circle, tackling the startled elderly Vietnam veteran with brutal, shocking force. "Contact front, get down or you're bloody dead. Move, move, move!" Chaos erupted. The therapy room, moments before a place of quiet, hesitant sharing, transformed into a scene of pandemonium and terror. Thomas, completely lost in the terrifying, all-consuming immediacy of a forgotten combat scenario, began to drag the terrified, bewildered older man across the floor towards the perceived cover of an overturned bookshelf. Facility staff, alerted by the shouts and the sounds of struggle, rushed in, attempting to restrain Thomas, to de-escalate the situation. But Thomas's highly honed, deeply ingrained combat training, his muscle memory, made him a formidable, dangerous opponent, even in his profoundly confused, disoriented state. He moved with a lethal, instinctive efficiency, easily evading their clumsy attempts to subdue him. Somehow, amidst the escalating pandemonium, Valor, who had been temporarily kenneled 2 floors below, forced his way through 2 heavy, magnetically locked security doors, a feat that would later baffle facility engineers, and raced a blur of focused canine energy into the crowded, chaotic room. Rather than attacking Thomas or adding to the confusion, he inserted himself with breathtaking precision and courage directly between the struggling Thomas and the approaching, increasingly alarmed staff members. The dog pressed his powerful body firmly against Thomas's trembling legs, then circled him once, slowly, deliberately, before sitting directly squarely in front of him, his intelligent amber gaze locked intently, commandingly on Thomas's wild, unfocused eyes. The effect was instantaneous, almost miraculous. Thomas froze mid-struggle, his frenzied rage, his combat adrenaline seeming to drain away, replaced by a sudden, profound, almost childlike confusion. Then a fleeting, fragile moment of something akin to clarity flickered in his eyes as he slowly, shakily sank to his knees, his grip on the terrified older veteran loosening. What's happening?" He murmured, his voice barely a whisper, as he looked around the room, around the ring of shocked, fearful faces, as if seeing the mundane therapy room for the very first time. The fragile connection, the momentary lucidity, was tragically brief. As several staff members rushed forward to check on his traumatized elderly victim, Thomas's fleeting confusion transformed with terrifying speed back into a volatile, explosive rage. But this time his anger was directed not at the other veteran, not at the staff, but solely, inexplicably, at Valor. "What the hell is this, huh?" he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fury as he scrambled backward away from the dog, his eyes filled with a wild, hunted look. Some kind of sick, twisted trick, using bloody animals now to try and manipulate me, to mess with my head. The deeply disturbing incident led to an immediate emergency all-hands staff meeting. Thomas, now utterly inconsolable, had barricaded himself in his room, refusing all food, medication, and any attempts at communication. This dog, this experiment, is clearly triggering severe, potentially dangerous adverse reactions in Sergeant Grady, the facility's ARSI assistant director, a bureaucrat named Henderson with a primary focus on risk mitigation and budgetary constraints, argued forcefully. "We have a duty of care to our other vulnerable patients to consider. We cannot allow one individual's experimental therapy to jeopardize the safety and stability of the entire ward." After a long, often heated debate, a reluctant, uneasy compromise was reached. Dr. Monroe, passionate in her defense of Valor's potential, fought hard. Valor would be granted a final 48 hours. If by then there was no significant, demonstrable, positive breakthrough in Thomas's condition, the dog would be permanently removed from the facility and returned to the military's MWD program at Fort Bragg. The clock was ticking. The next morning found Thomas in the facility's small enclosed therapy garden, a bleak manicured square of green amidst the gray concrete of the hospital complex. He was struggling visibly with a fresh onslaught of fragmented, tormenting flashbacks, fleeting images of smoke shouting the smell of cordite, the unbearable, piercing screams of wounded men. He didn't notice Valor's silent, deliberate approach until the dog sat directly, calmly before him, blocking his path. "Get away from me," Thomas growled, his voice low and menacing. "I told them to keep you bloody well away from me." Valor didn't move, didn't flinch, his amber eyes fixed on Thomas's ravaged face with an unwavering, almost heartbreaking intensity and determination. Thomas stood abruptly, his fists clenched, his body trembling with suppressed rage and fear. "I said get back. I don't know you. You're not real." He started to walk away blindly, but staggered violently as another, more powerful flash of disorienting images hit him. The Afghan village again, the mud brick compounds, but this time overlaid with a strange, acrid chemical odor. Beneath the pervasive dust, a smell that made his nostrils flare and his stomach churn. The sudden, intense disorientation dropped him heavily to one knee. When his vision cleared, when the world stopped spinning, Valor was there again, directly before him, silent, watchful, unwavering. "What do you want from me?" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking, tears of sheer frustration and despair welling in his eyes. "What the hell do you want?" He shoved the dog hard with both hands, a desperate, angry gesture. Valor absorbed the unexpected impact with barely a flinch for his powerful body, solid, unyielding, refusing to be moved, to be deterred. A soft, almost inaudible whine emerged from deep in his chest, a sound not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated canine determination. "Get away from me," Thomas shouted again, his voice hoarse, scrambling backward like a crab desperate to escape the dog's unsettling, knowing gaze. I don't know you. I don't remember you. You're a ghost." His back hit the cold, rough brick of the garden wall. Thomas slid down it slowly, defeatedly, drawing his knees up to his chest in a defensive, almost fetal position. The sheer crushing enormity of his desperate, hopeless situation crashed down upon him with unbearable weight. A man with no past, no memory, no discernible identity beyond what others cursorily told him. He was a hollow shell trapped in an endless, terrifying loop between agonizingly fragmentary, traumatic flashbacks and a bleak, utterly meaningless present. Just leave me alone," he whispered, his voice choked with unshed tears, his shoulders shaking. "Please, just go." And the retreat he so desperately craved, the solitude he yearned for, didn't come. Instead, Valor, after a moment of quiet, canine contemplation, approached him again, this time with a slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial calm. The big Malinois circled him once, slowly, gracefully, his nails clicking softly on the paved pathway. Then, with a precise, almost ritualistic movement that spoke of years of ingrained training and deep instinctual understanding, he lowered himself slowly, purposefully to the ground. He stretched out full length before Thomas, placing his noble, intelligent head directly, specifically on the worn, dusty toe of Thomas's left combat boot. It was a very particular, very deliberate position, chin down, resting eye marvel on the leather ears, pricked sharply forward, alert and watchful, his amber eyes angled upwards so that they would meet Thomas's gaze directly if or when he raised his head. Thomas went completely, utterly still, his breath caught in his throat. Something about that precise, deliberate angle of Valor's head, the specific, familiar weight of his chin resting against his boot, the unwavering intensity of that upward gaze sent a powerful, jangling, electric current of profound, undeniable recognition, coursing like a wildfire through the desolate, barren landscape of his mind. The drab therapy garden, the gray walls, the manicured rose bushes, all blurred, wavered, then were suddenly shockingly overlaid with another far more vivid, far more terrifying scene. Dusty, sun-baked Afghan ground, the heavy, familiar weight of tactical gear, the eerie, green-tinged world of night vision goggles, the distant, sporadic crackle of small arms fire, and this exact, precise, familiar pressure of Valor's head against his boot. "Wait. Walked positioner." No, Thomas whispered the word, the German command for watch or guard. Emerging unbidden in echo from a forgotten life, dredged from the deepest recesses of his muscle memory, his subconscious. "Hold position, bleib." Valor's expressive ears twitched sharply forward at the sound of the familiar commands, his body becoming even more, still more focused, a living statue of canine obedience and unwavering loyalty. Thomas stared at the dog, his heart racing, his mind reeling, as 1,000 disconnected, fragmented shards of memory began to swirl, to coalesce, to align themselves into a recognizable, coherent pattern. I know this. I know you." He reached out a trembling, hesitant hand, hovering for a long moment just above Valor's proud, waiting head. When his shaking fingers finally tentatively made contact with the warm, familiar fur, Valor released a sound, a deep, shuddering sigh of such profound, almost human relief, such utter heartfelt contentment that it seemed to vibrate through the very core of Thomas's shattered being. We trained together." Thomas said, his voice thick with dawning, incredulous wonder, the fragments of memory now solidifying, locking into place with an almost audible click for the very first time since his devastating injury. "Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You were just a year old then, a young pup, full of piss and vinegar. You failed the standard MWD suitability program, didn't you? Because you wouldn't leave my bloody side during the damn separation anxiety tests. Stubborn bastard." Each halting word, each retrieved fragment, brought another piece of the vast, complex puzzle of his lost life, slotting with a jolt of recognition into its rightful place. Thomas's hand, moving with an unconscious, deeply ingrained familiarity, began to scratch gently behind Valor's left ear, in exactly the precise spot the dog had always preferred, a comforting, repetitive motion his body remembered with perfect clarity, even when his conscious mind had not. "You slept at the foot of my bunk." Thomas continued, his voice gaining a new warmth, a growing certainty, a profound dawning recognition that chased away the shadows. "Against all regulations, Sergeant Major Sanders, old Leatherface, he covered for us, didn't he? Because you kept alerting to his secret stash of Irish whiskey hidden under his cot." A faint smile, the first genuine smile Dr. Monroe had ever seen on his face, touched his lips. Dr. Monroe, who had been alerted by Jim the orderly via a hushed radio call, watched transfixed and deeply moved from the discreet concealment of the garden entrance, motioning urgently for the other curious staff members to keep their distance, to give them space to allow this fragile, miraculous moment to unfold uninterrupted. Thomas's questing fingers found a tiny, almost invisible notch in Valor's left ear, a small, neatly healed split in the cartilage hidden beneath the thick protective fur. "You got this in Kunar province, you crazy mutt." A bloody sniper round that came way too close for comfort whistled right past my head. "Should have listened to your initial alert sooner that day. You always knew." "Anna," Valor pressed his head more firmly, more insistently against Thomas's hand, as if encouraging the nascent connection, urging the memories to surface. "I used to tell the other guys in the unit, the new lieutenants especially, that you were smarter than the half of them put together. And you were." Thomas's fingers, exploring with a newfound tenderness, traced along the line of Valor's powerful neck, finding another older, more significant scar. A thick, raised welt hidden deep beneath the fur near his shoulder. "You took shrapnel here, didn't you? Shrapnel that was meant for me, outside Kandahar during that ambush on Route Viper." Dr. Monroe approached them, then slowly, carefully, her footsteps barely rustling the fallen leaves on the path. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "Thomas, you're remembering." He looked up at her, his eyes, for the first time since she had known him, truly clear, focused, alive. The fog had lifted. Not everything, Doc. Not yet. Just him. Valor." The name, his name, felt right now, natural, essential. "We worked together. He was my responsibility. And God help me, I was his. He, me, you couldn't. Your former commanding officer, Colonel Armitage, he truly believed that your extraordinary connection, your unique bond, might be the key to break through the amnesia." Dr. Monroe explained, her professional composure momentarily beautifully fractured by the sheer emotional power of the scene unfolding before her. "Memory is such a complex, enigmatic thing, Thomas. Sometimes deep emotional connections, profound bonds can forge or reopen pathways in the brain that logic, medication, and conventional therapy simply can't reach." Thomas nodded slowly, his hand never leaving the comforting, familiar solidity of Valor's fur. I still don't remember exactly what happened, how I got so badly hurt, why we were separated. It's still a black hole." "That may well come in time, Thomas," Dr. Monroe said gently. "But this is a truly remarkable, significant breakthrough. More than we could have hoped for." "He never forgot," Thomas said softly, his voice thick with a raw, overwhelming emotion as he met Valor's steady, unwavering, knowing gaze. "He never forgot me, even when I had forgotten myself." Valor shifted his position then, with fluid grace, rising to sit at perfect military attention, directly beside Thomas rather than before him. It was a subtle but deeply significant shift in posture, moving from a protective, watchful stance to the familiar partnered position they had maintained during countless arduous, dangerous missions, side by side, a unified team. Thomas, as if cued by an invisible signal, straightened his own posture, his shoulders squaring his hand, resting with a natural, unconscious ease on Valor's strong, warm back. I, I want to remember more, Doc, he said, his voice imbued with a new, powerful, unshakable determination. I need to know what happened to us, what happened on that last day. Throughout the following days and weeks, Thomas and Valor were inseparable. Each passing hour, each shared moment, each familiar, unconscious interaction between man and dog seemed to bring forth a fresh cascade of returning memories, as Valor's constant, reassuring presence systematically, patiently unlocked long-closed, heavily barricaded doors in the labyrinthine corridors of Thomas's traumatized mind. We were deployed together 3 times, not 2, as the records initially stated, Thomas told Dr. Monroe during one of their now dramatically more productive therapy sessions, Valor lying quietly watchfully at his feet. The first tour was relatively routine, mainly focused on route patrol vehicle searches and explosive detection around Bagram, standard stuff. Second deployment, they switched our ODA to more direct action missions primarily because of how incredibly well Valor and I worked together as a cohesive unit. High-risk village clearance operations, night raids, that sort of thing. Valor could detect not just IEDs and hidden weapon caches, but also concealed personnel insurgents hiding in spider holes or tunnels. He had this uncanny way of alerting differently for different types of threats, one distinct ear twitch and a low growl for explosives, 2 sharp, quick barks for hidden personnel. He saved our entire unit from walking into ambushes multiple times. He was a lifesaver, plain and simple. Dr. Monroe noted with satisfaction how Thomas's speech patterns had continued to shift to transform. He was more confident, more articulate, using precise military terminology, with easy unconscious accuracy, the familiar authoritative cadence of a seasoned soldier returning like a forgotten melody to his voice. Thomas nodded, his gaze distant, lost in a vivid, recently retrieved memory. Having him here, Doc, it just connects me to who I was, to the man I used to be. I still have gaps, God knows, huge, terrifying black holes in my memory. But there's context now, a framework to hang things on. It's not just emptiness anymore. Specific, seemingly inconsequential behaviors from Valor would often trigger a flood of associated detailed memories. When the dog, as was his habit, pressed his wet nose gently but insistently against Thomas's knee, Thomas suddenly vividly recalled their complex, almost telepathic system of silent, nonverbal communication in the field, a system that had often meant the difference between life and death. When one of the younger nurses, charmed by Valor, unthinkingly brought him a bright yellow tennis ball, Thomas was instantly transported back, remembering countless hours spent playing fetch with Valor behind their dusty, sun-baked barracks in some forgotten Afghan outpost, a brief, cherished respite from the ever-present tension and danger of their daily existence. Michaels, Thomas said suddenly, unexpectedly, during a quiet afternoon walk through the facility's now autumnal gardens, the name surfacing from the depths like a long-lost shipwreck. Specialist Kevin Michaels. He was our unit's comms expert, a genius with anything electronic. Skinny kid from Ohio. He always carried a pocket full of butterscotch candies specifically for Valor, even though I told him 100 times not to feed my damn dog sweets. Said it was bad for his teeth. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his newly bright eyes. By that evening, Thomas, with Dr. Monroe's gentle encouragement, was painstakingly creating a detailed timeline of his last deployment, writing down names, dates, and significant operational events as they returned to him, sometimes in a trickle, sometimes in a torrent. Jenkins Rodriguez Patel, he listed his pen scratching across the notepad. Captain Ellis, he oversaw our entire company. Lieutenant Cooper, a good man, a decent officer, was our direct ODA team leader. Listened to his NCOs, respected our experience. Not like some of the fresh-faced academy grads. He listened when Valor alerted, even when others would have pulled rank and ignored a dog's instinct. When he began to recall with sudden, painful clarity a particularly brutal mission where they'd lost a young team member, a private named Henderson Thomas grew visibly distressed, his breathing becoming shallow, his hands clenching. Without any prompting, without a single command, Valor rose silently from his spot by the window, padded over to Thomas, and placed his heavy head gently but firmly on Thomas's trembling knee, grounding him, anchoring him in the present, preventing the painful memory from overwhelming him, from becoming another debilitating, triggering flashback. "The last mission," Thomas said finally, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, his face pale, his eyes haunted. It was a mountain village high up near the volatile Pakistan border. A designated high-value target, a known insurgent leader, was reportedly using it as a temporary waypoint, a stopover on his way to a meeting. 4 assault teams of 2 each team, comprised of a handler and his dog. Standard operating procedure for that kind of terrain. He pushed mentally, physically against the formidable, almost impenetrable barrier his mind had erected around the traumatic events of that final fateful day. I remember the pre-dawn approach, the thin, cold air, the stars like chips of ice. I remember the detailed satellite imagery, the village layout, the designated sectors for each team. Valor and we took the easternmost cluster of buildings. Our job was to secure the primary escape route. Surientum, Valor's ears pricked sharply forward, his powerful body tensing slightly, his breathing deepening as if he too were accessing the same shared terrifying memory. There was an ambush. Thomas continued, his voice strained, his knuckles white, as he gripped the arms of his chair. Not random. They were waiting for us. It was too well coordinated, too precise. Someone on the inside must have leaked our operational plan. His breath quickened, his heart began to pound against his ribs. Gunfire. Suddenly from multiple concealed positions. Heavy machine guns, RPGs, radio chatter, urgent, panicked. Men down. We were pinned down hopelessly in a small, exposed, walled courtyard between 2 burning buildings. Thomas's hands shaking uncontrollably, tightened convulsively in Valor's thick fur. Valor alerted. Not to the shooters. We knew damn well where they were. It was something else, something different. He kept trying to block my path, to physically prevent me from moving forward, giving the urgent, frantic, explosive signal, whining, nudging me back. He shook his head, his eyes squeezed shut against the horror of the memory. That's where it always fragments again, where the blackness descends. I remember his insistent alert, his desperation, then nothing but unbearable noise and crushing pressure, and then just darkness. Utter, complete, terrifying darkness. That's enough for today, Thomas, Dr. Monroe said gently, her voice calm but firm, recognizing the signs of impending overload. You've made truly remarkable, almost unbelievable progress, more than anyone dared to hope for. The final complete breakthrough, the unlocking of the last most heavily guarded door in his mind, came unexpectedly, violently a week later. A heavy delivery truck backfired loudly, explosively in the facility's main parking lot, directly beneath the window of the recreation room where Thomas was attempting to play a desultory game of chess with another patient. The sudden sharp report, so similar to a gunshot or a small explosion, echoed like a thunderclap through the otherwise quiet room. Thomas reacted instantaneously, instinctively. He dropped to a defensive crouch, simultaneously pulling the startled other veteran down with him, his eyes scanning rapidly, expertly for perceived threats for the source of the gunfire. IED, contact front, he shouted, his voice a harsh, guttural roar of pure combat reflex. The present moment completely, utterly overtaken, consumed by the vivid, terrifying memory of that last fateful mission. This time, however, instead of disorienting, confusing fragments, the memory unfolded with a terrible, stark, unwavering clarity, like a high-definition film playing in his mind. We had successfully cleared our first 2 designated buildings. Thomas explained later that day to Dr. Monroe, his voice hoarse, his body still trembling from the aftershocks of the relived trauma. Valor, sensing his profound distress, oppressed his warm, solid body reassuringly against his side, a silent, constant comfort. Specialist Michaels and Lieutenant Cooper, they were pinned down by heavy, accurate fire in the adjacent sector. Captain Ellis was on the radio coordinating a desperate emergency extraction, trying to get air support. Valor and I, we were moving to provide suppressing fire to support their withdrawal when even heavier fire erupted from a previously unseen enemy position. His hand moved unconsciously to the old faded scar on his left arm. We made it behind a low, crumbling stone wall. That's when everything changed. Everything went to hell. Ew. Thomas described in painstaking, agonizing detail how Valor's behavior had suddenly, inexplicably shifted from his usual calm, controlled alerts to frantic, almost desperate attempts to physically block him, to prevent him from advancing further. He kept giving the explosive alert over and over frantically, but I couldn't see any of the usual triggers we were trained for. No disturbed earth, no tripwires, no command wires, nothing. His voice tightened thick with remembered frustration and dawning unbearable guilt. I thought he was confused, disoriented by the sheer volume of gunfire, by the chaos. I ordered him forward twice, and twice he refused to obey a direct command, something he had never ever done in his entire service career. Valor whined softly, a low, mournful sound, as if reliving the terrible weight of that shared tragic memory. Rodriguez, Specialist Rodriguez from Charlie Team, he was down badly wounded out in the open, calling desperately for support for a medic. I made the call. I was going to move to him to try and drag him to cover, despite Valor's increasingly frantic, insistent warning. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, his face a mask of remembered agony. I ordered him to heal using the specific overriding command word that by protocol overrides his independent threat response. I forced him to obey. Halfway to Rodriguez, Valor broke protocol completely, catastrophically. He lunged at me savagely, bit my tactical vest not to harm me, but trying desperately to drag me back to stop me. I was angry, then furious. I thought his training had completely broken down under the pressure. I shouted at him. I ordered him to release me and to continue forward to clear the path to Rodriguez. Thomas's voice dropped to a barely audible, broken whisper. He obeyed that final terrible command, but his entire body language, it was all wrong. His ears were flat against his skull, his tail tucked tight between his legs, moving forward like he was being forced toward his own execution. 10 meters, maybe less from Rodriguez, Valor suddenly explosively lunged far ahead of me, giving his loudest, most urgent, high-pitched alert bark, a sound I'd never heard before. That's when I finally belatedly saw it, a set of almost invisible, hair-thin filament wires, cunningly concealed, leading to a massive daisy-chain pressure plate IED buried directly beneath Rodriguez's bleeding body. The IED wasn't meant for just one soldier. It was a deliberately designed, devastating anti-personnel trap intended for any rescue or response team. Rodriguez, poor bastard, had triggered the first low-pressure sensor when he fell, but his dying weight alone wasn't enough to fully detonate the main charge. Any additional weight, even a footstep, would have set it off. Valor knew all along. He'd been trying to tell me, to warn me. When I wouldn't listen, when I forced him, he ran ahead, deliberately, heroically trying to clear the trigger himself, to sacrifice himself to save us both. I finally understood. I started screaming into my radio, calling for immediate EOD support, warning the others. I had just keyed my radio, just opened my mouth to speak, when the entire world just exploded. The blast killed Rodriguez instantly, critically, horrifically injured me, and separated me violently from Valor. My very last fading memory before the blackness of Walter Reed was of Valor himself, bleeding heavily from multiple shrapnel wounds, standing steadfastly over my broken, unconscious body, keeping a protective perimeter, holding back the encroaching darkness, even as I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't help myself. Thomas looked down at the magnificent dog years of unspoken, unacknowledged emotion. Guilt, gratitude, love, shame, welling in his eyes. I failed him, Doc. I failed him so badly. He gave me every possible warning, and I ignored them all. I was arrogant. I was a fool. You didn't fail him, Thomas, Dr. Monroe said gently, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. You made an impossible judgment call in an impossible situation, trying desperately to save your wounded teammate. And Valor never ever gave up on you. Not then and not now. Mahona, that's why I couldn't remember. Thomas realized a profound shuddering wave of understanding washing over him. My last conscious thought before everything went black was that I had killed Rodriguez and that I had endangered everyone, my entire team, by stubbornly, stupidly ignoring Valor's warnings. The guilt, the shame, it was too much. The human mind has powerful, often mysterious ways of protecting us from trauma, from memories, from emotions that we simply can't process, that we aren't ready to face. Dr. Monroe explained softly. Thomas nodded slowly, his hand resting with a newfound reverence on Valor's strong, warm back. I think I'm ready now, Doc. I think with his help, I'm finally ready. The following weeks brought a truly remarkable, almost miraculous transformation in Thomas. His memories, now that the critical traumatic barrier had been breached, returned in a steady, manageable, often cathartic flow. He talked for hours to Dr. Monroe, to Valor, to the walls of his room, piecing together the shattered mosaic of his past, reclaiming his lost identity, his lost life. And as Thomas healed, as his own emotional wounds began to scar over Valor, almost imperceptibly at first, then with increasing confidence, began to briefly, tentatively interact with some of the other deeply distressed veterans in the facility. He would approach them quietly, position himself near them during moments of acute crisis or distress, offering a silent, comforting, non-judgmental presence before always faithfully returning to Thomas's side. He's always been able to sense when someone's struggling, when they're in pain, even if they don't show it. Thomas explained to Dr. Monroe one afternoon, watching Valor gently nudge the hand of a young withdrawn Marine who hadn't spoken a word in weeks. It's what made him so exceptional as an MWD, so much more than just an explosives detection dog. He could read humans, their emotions, their intentions often better than we could read ourselves. The morning of Thomas's official discharge from St. Albans arrived with a crisp, clear, early autumn sunlight filtering like liquid gold through the turning leaves of the trees in the facility garden. His few possessions were packed, a few changes of civilian clothes, his prescribed medications, a thick, dog-eared journal filled with his newly recovered memories, and a small, treasured bundle of letters from his former unit members, letters that had been waiting for him unread for months. Valor watched the packing process with his usual alert, intelligent calmness, his tail thumping a slow, steady rhythm on the linoleum floor. His own military service vest, freshly cleaned and repaired, had been returned to Thomas by Captain Davies alongside Valor's official retirement paperwork, if Thomas chose that path for his loyal partner. Dr. Monroe knocked gently on the open door. Everything ready, Thomas. Your sister is waiting downstairs in the reception area. Thomas nodded, zipping his worn duffel bag closed. As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose. She seemed very happy, very relieved on the phone, eager to finally have you home. Yes, Thomas said, a faint smile. Still strange in a way. Reconnecting with family I barely remembered even existed just a few short months ago. Have you made a final decision about Valor? Dr. Monroe asked softly, her gaze resting on the magnificent dog. Thomas's expression turned deeply thoughtful, his eyes troubled. I'd like to talk it through with you one last time, Doc, if you have a moment. Out in the garden, perhaps. They walked together in comfortable silence to the small, sun-dappled therapy garden where their shared miraculous breakthrough had occurred. Valor walking proudly, contentedly beside them, his body occasionally brushing against Thomas's leg. "I've been watching him very closely these past few weeks." Doc Thomas began, his voice quiet, reflective. "Watching how Valor interacts with the other veterans here. It's not just me he connects with so profoundly. It's anyone who's suffering from that same kind of darkness, that same kind of despair I was so utterly lost in." Dr. Monroe nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. His unprompted, intuitive interventions with several of our most challenging, treatment-resistant patients in acute crisis have been, well, frankly, quite remarkable, almost unprecedented. That's what always made him so exceptional in combat, you see. Thomas explained, his voice filled with a deep, quiet pride. "Most military working dogs, they're trained to detect specific threats. Explosives, narcotics, enemy combatants. Valor always seemed to know when something was fundamentally wrong, systemically wrong with a situation, often long before we had any concrete evidence, any actionable intelligence. He could sense the subtle shifts in human behavior, the almost imperceptible changes in atmosphere, things that even the most experienced battle-hardened soldiers amongst us often missed." Thomas ran his hands slowly, lovingly along Valor's strong, warm back. I always thought it was our unique connection, our special bond that made him so special. But now I'm beginning to understand. It's just who he is. This incredible innate ability to understand suffering, to connect with it, to try and alleviate it. You're seriously considering leaving him here at the facility, aren't you, Thomas?" Dr. Monroe realized, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and profound respect. Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the garden wall, his heart aching with the impending decision. "The purely selfish part of me, the part that remembers those terrible empty months of darkness, wants desperately to take him home with me. God knows he's earned his retirement 100 times over. He's more than just a dog to me, Doc. He's the one who found me when I was completely, utterly lost to myself." Valor, as if sensing the turmoil in Thomas's heart, pressed his head gently but firmly against Thomas's leg, a silent, unwavering affirmation of their unbreakable bond. "But I keep thinking about the others." Thomas continued, his voice thickening with emotion. "The ones still trapped back there where I was. All those other wounded warriors, men and women, with no clear way back, no guiding light." Thomas's voice, when he spoke again, was thick with unshed tears. Valor found a path for me when no one else, nothing else could. How many others, Doc? How many others could he help find their way home? We've had some preliminary, tentative discussions amongst the senior staff. Dr. Monroe said carefully, about the possibility of creating a new specialized animal-assisted therapy program based largely on the astonishing success of your case, Thomas. Using highly trained service dogs like Valor. He wouldn't just be part of it, Doc. Thomas insisted, his voice gaining a new strength, a new conviction. He'd be the bloody heart of it. He'd be the blueprint, the living, breathing example of healing through these incredible, profound connections that we can't yet fully explain, that science can't yet quantify. Finally, with a deep, steadying sigh, Thomas knelt slowly before Valor, meeting his loyal partner, eye to eye, men to dog, warrior to warrior. You've always known your mission, haven't you, boy?" he said softly, his hands gently, reverently framing the dog's noble, intelligent face. "Better than anyone. In Afghanistan, here at this place, you've never once lost sight of what truly matters, of who truly needs you." Valor's attention, his focus, was absolute, unwavering, his amber eyes filled with a deep, knowing intelligence. "My service, my time in uniform, it has ended now." Thomas continued, his voice steady, resolute, though his heart felt as if it were breaking. "But yours, my brave friend, yours, I think, is just beginning. Others need you now, Valor. They need you just the way I so desperately needed you. Others who are lost and alone and don't know how to find their way back from the darkness." Thomas pressed his forehead gently for a long moment against Valor's. You'll show them the way, boy, just like you showed me. And when you've finally completely completed that new mission, however long it takes, I'll be waiting for you. I promise. Thomas stood then, slowly composing himself with the deeply ingrained, hard-won military discipline that had been his bedrock for so many years. Dr. Monroe shall look after you now. She understands. And I'll visit. Often. This isn't goodbye, Valor. It's just new orders. A new posting. He straightened his shoulders, his face a mask of determined resolve. Valor, bleib. Stay, he commanded gently, his voice thick with unshed emotion. For a single agonizing moment, a visible conflict warred within the dog's intelligent eyes, the powerful primal instinct to follow his beloved handler warring fiercely with years of ingrained training, with his deep understanding of Thomas's intent. Then with a quiet sigh, Valor settled into a perfect, unwavering sit, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with Thomas. Thomas nodded once, a sharp, brief acknowledgement between equals, between partners, rather than between handler and dog. Then with an almost superhuman effort of will, he turned his back and walked away, each step away from Valor, away from the creature who had saved his life and his sanity, requiring an immense, almost unbearable act of personal sacrifice. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Valor remained sitting at perfect disciplined attention in the center of the sunlit garden, watching his partner, his friend, his brother-in-arms leave. Only when Thomas had completely disappeared from view, when the sound of his footsteps had faded into silence, did the magnificent dog turn his noble head and look towards Dr. Monroe, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. While one critical mission had indeed ended, another, perhaps even more important one, was just beginning.